Hi. So we will continue our conference, and I'm glad to welcome Christos. He's a software developer, dad blogger, husband, speaker, and all-around geek. And I would like to give him a word. So let's start.
What's up, everyone? I hope you've been having a great time. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there in person, so I'll do my best to entertain you from the comfort of my home in Seattle. So it's 6 a.m. over here. I'm really excited to be with you. And today we're going to be talking about secure mobile apps with the Microsoft Identity platform. If you're a .NET developer, if you use Xamarin before, then this is going to be perfect for you. If you haven't done these things before, if you haven't dealt with identities and security, then this is going to be a nice intro into all this domain. Unfortunately, my friend JP and colleague could not join us today because he had a family emergency, so I'll be driving solo. I hope I'm good enough for you. So I'm going to skip the introduction because you guys did a great job, just to make sure that it's the same person in the picture, just slightly older, less hair, but hopefully slightly more wise. Okay. If you like what you see today, and if you enjoy watching people building software live and explaining to people how and why they need to put certain things together in a certain way, end-to-end scenarios and security, then make sure to follow us on Twitch. We have a bi-weekly show every Tuesday and Friday now. We changed the schedule at 8 a.m. Pacific or 5 p.m. Central European time. And we'll talk about identity and security and Azure and cloud and .NET and all the languages. So if you're interested in learning about security, then this is a great place. We also have a Discord. I will add the links later on to allow you to join. I know that everyone has joined Discord for Fwdays. So, you know, we have a Discord channel as well where you can come and talk to the community about security and identity. Now, why is it important? Why are we having this conversation, in fact? Well, I've been working in the industry for 17 years now, and I have worked with many companies. I worked as a consultant, I worked as a field engineer for Microsoft, and now as a PM in identity. So I've seen quite a few pieces of software. I've written my fair share of bad software, but it's mainly due to lack of inexperience or overestimating our abilities to write secure software, where we end up with people building their own identity systems. They're creating their own username and password databases. And it's very likely that you're going to come across this one anyway, because unless you're building a marketing site, it's very unlikely that you won't have to deal with your users. You need to know who the user is in order to serve their data or to give them the right permissions to do something. Therefore, identities are everywhere. Mobile apps, like I use my phone all the time, and most of the apps require me to sign in somehow so I can have personalized data, manage my activities, and build a network. Whether you're building a line of business app or whether you're building a consumer app, it's important to be able to manage this identity securely. And, you know, all these different companies have overestimated their abilities in building secure software. So throughout the last few years since we started looking at these things, many companies from all different industries have fallen victim to cyber attacks. And cyber attacks are growing significantly because it's an easy way to make money and fund other activities. So as you can see, 550 sites have been monitored. Now, I don't know if you've seen Have I Been Pwned before. If you haven't, it's a fantastic website. It allows you to go and put your email address or email addresses that you use around the web and find out whether these email addresses have ever fallen victim to a cyber attack. So if you ever used Adobe, or if you ever had to use Dropbox, for example, then at some point they got hacked, and if you had an account with them for a while, then it's highly likely that your accounts have fallen victim to these attacks. Now, you might say, well, you know what? I bought Domino's Pizza once, and okay, I have an account, so what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that these accounts are actually commodity that is traded in order to allow attackers to mount different attacks. A very good example is making money on Facebook by someone using your account to sign into Facebook, then putting a message out there to say, well, I'm in an emergency, I had a car crash, I have no money, please wire me some money, and friends and family will rush to help you. The FBI is estimating that over $300 million were lost or stolen using this kind of attacks. So you can see how easy it is that someone will take an account that you used to buy some sports gear in the past to go and sign into Netflix or Facebook or other social media accounts, try to impersonate you and get your data. Sometimes it's not about getting data. Sometimes it's about mounting attacks or using resources to run crypto mining. So if like me, you ever had the unlikely scenario of checking in your credentials in some GitHub repo to some Azure account, or storage keys to a storage account somewhere like S2 or S3 on AWS, then that information becomes extremely valuable to attackers because they can use that to go and sign in or access your resources and use them for their own purposes. So as you can see, it's not a simple case of, well, I'm storing my username and password somewhere, it's fine, it's safe. So we don't want you to do that. We want you to use an existing system. And there are identity providers out there, identity provider systems or platforms that allow you to quickly integrate identity into your systems, and you are free to go and do the other things. So rather than spending 3 or 4 months learning about OAuth and OpenID Connect and what is modern authentication and how to work with tokens, what we give you is the ability to quickly go and implement that by using a library, and therefore moving very, very quickly. And you might say, okay, let's use that. Is it going to scale? Is it good? Is it reliable? And so on. So as you can see here, Azure AD is Microsoft's identity platform, scales to 30 billion authentications per day. I had to double check the number to make sure that this is correct, but yeah, this is right. We do more than 30 billion authentications per day on our platform, across internal apps, external apps. Any system that works with Microsoft will go through Azure AD. So if the next time you sign into OneDrive or you're logging into Office, you're going through Azure Active Directory. So it scales. And your company might not be a 30 billion account company. It might be a 10-person company. The nice thing is that you as a developer don't have to worry about going from 10 accounts to 1,000 accounts to 10 million accounts, if that's the growth that you're seeing, because the platform will take care of that for you. And what do you get out of the Microsoft Identity Platform? Well, since you already have Azure AD somewhere, if you're using Azure or if you are using Office, then it's very likely that you already have an Azure Active Directory sitting somewhere waiting for you to be used. It's very easy to get started with it. We already provide you with the appropriate authentication libraries, the MSAL library, the Microsoft Authentication Library, in most major frameworks and languages, but you can also bring your own OpenID Connect and OAuth 2 libraries to work with. The whole point is that with a few lines of code, you can get started. We'll see how easy it is to build a secure app in a bit. And it integrates with your platform language. So if you're using Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, or if you're using even Rider and IntelliJ, we'll be providing you with Azure AD plugins to easily integrate with your tooling. And then for the languages, as I said, we have support for most major languages. .NET obviously is one of them, and JavaScript, Java, Python, all the good ones. And then for the ones that we don't support as first party, you can use a third party library. And finally, and this is the most important bit, this is the one that really gets me excited. It's the fact that you as a developer don't have to think about the advanced features that your app will need. What are these advanced features? Well, let's see first. Let's think about multi-factor authentication. If you have to implement it yourself, or if you ever done it, then you know that it's a multitude of services that you need to implement, as well as a lot of complex business logic. So it's not just you sign in and I send you a text message. Now you need the text message service, but it's also making sure that that code does not get hijacked, expires accordingly, integrates with authenticator apps or one-time password apps like Google and Microsoft Authenticator and so on. So that's a complex feature. What about conditional access? Maybe you want to restrict access to your application to a certain number of accounts, and therefore you have to build that logic. Now, if you have to build that logic in your code, that's super complex. With Azure Active Directory, it only takes 5 minutes for an IT admin to go and configure that conditional access and apply it to one or multiple apps. And then you have things like token binding and continuous access evaluation, which are tools to allow you to secure your tokens and revoke them on demand, therefore making your apps more resilient and easier to implement. So these are all the features that you don't have to develop or build as a developer. And therefore, you get reduced sign-in friction. Users have an expected and consistent way of signing into your applications, whether it's Azure Active Directory or B2C. You can give them access to your organizational data super easy. Once they sign into Azure Active Directory, then that account can request permissions to access Azure, to access Office, to access Graph, and it opens up a whole world of data. And as I said, IT can come in and monitor the applications. They can revoke tokens. They can block them. They can stop people from accessing them from places or IPs that they shouldn't be, and so on and so on. And finally, safeguarding access to you and your data. So you as a consumer as well, you have confidence that your data is stored securely and that your account is not going to fall victim to the next cyber attack that takes place, because it's a $1 trillion business. Therefore, we don't want to give them more fuel. You as a developer have a responsibility to actually write secure software. And that's how you get started, by not writing your own username and password databases. There are two main components when it comes to implementing identity. Whether you're using Azure Active Directory, hopefully you use that, or the Microsoft Identity Platform, or whether you're using a different identity provider like Facebook, Twitter, or somebody else, then you have to do two things. One is you have to create an app registration or an application, whatever they call it. So on Azure AD or Microsoft Identity Platform, we call it an app registration. This is when you go into the Azure Active Directory and you show your intent. You say, I'm going to sign in my users with Azure Active Directory, and they need to have these kind of permissions or they need to access certain APIs. Once you do that, you get some information that you need to plug into your library. And as I said, the Microsoft Authentication library is there for you to grab. It works with every client. So whether it's a mobile, we're doing mobile today, whether it's a desktop, whether it's a web app or an IoT device, you can use that. But if you don't want to use the MSAL libraries, you can use any OpenID Connect library, because we're OIDC compliant. So we build a platform on top of open standards, and therefore there's nothing proprietary there. Next, we have an API access or multiple API access. In mobile apps, these days, it's quite common to push the responsibility and the data management into an API and create a very thin layer in the front end. Therefore, your mobile app does not have to do heavy logic or heavy thinking. Therefore, your web APIs can handle that. And for us to be secure, we need to ensure that the phone or your mobile app connects to these APIs securely. So that's something that we may have to go back into Azure AD to configure, to say, not only do I want you to sign in my users, but I also want to get an access token to go and securely access my APIs and get my data. And with that, we can do authentication and authorization in one go. From an identity perspective, like who can sign in or what kind of accounts can we manage? We obviously have work and school accounts that are supported by Azure Active Directory. Anyone with your business email is using Azure Active Directory, and they can sign in to your mobile apps if you integrate with Azure Active Directory. We also support personal Microsoft accounts. So if you have an Xbox account, that's a Microsoft account. If you have your own commercial, like if you have your Office and you bought a license for it, that's not part of your enterprise, then that's a Microsoft account. And you can build apps for those accounts if you want, or support those accounts as a sign-in as well. but we also have external identities. And these are, if you are building a forum for your friend, or if you're building a mobile app that needs to sign in users to check their profile and, log their workouts, or if you're building an app that is selling stuff, like let's say you're the next Walmart or the next McDonald's, people need to come into your app to sign in and make an order, then these are all external accounts. I want to use my Gmail, I want to use my Outlook, I want to use my Yahoo, is Yahoo still around, account to sign in to your application. I don't want to create a new account. Sometimes I also want to use my social media account. So I might want to sign in with my Twitter or my Facebook or my Twitter account or my Twitch account, right? So all that allows us to, in effect, bring all these external identities into our system. We don't have to rewrite all the business logic. We just integrate in the backend, and the users get this delightful experience of, well, I want to create a new account, or I might want to use my social media account to sign in, and it's seamless to them. You get one sign-in screen for everything. And as I said, it's all built on top of open standards, so therefore it's super easy. Now, B2C has the added benefit. So B2C is business to consumer or business to customer. So Azure AD is for organizational users, and B2C is sitting over here, allowing you to build mobile apps that are a little bit more secure, a little bit more consistent. So with Azure AD, you get redirected to a standard vanilla page. It doesn't look as exciting as your app may look. So B2C allows you to fully customize the look and feel of the sign-in page, therefore making it look and feel like your existing app. So even though your users get redirected to a web page to sign in, as you can see, that page can look exactly like the rest of your application, and therefore fully customizable with HTML and CSS. And it is a more delightful experience, to be honest. Okay, and it scales. Like also B2C comes with 50,000 authentications for free. That means that 50,000 monthly active users can use your application and you don't have to pay a penny. Once you hit your 50,000 users, then there's a scaling cost that goes up. But the nice thing is that if you hit 50,000 users, then that's a good problem to have, to start paying for identities. But up to 50,000 users, they can sign in as many times as they want every month, and you won't spend a penny or a cent, whatever your monetary system is. Okay, I think that's it. I mean, we have single sign-on with that as well. We support MSA accounts, and can build super elaborate systems with B2C as well. Okay, and with that, let's do our first demo, because I've been speaking for 18 minutes and I know that my voice is not the most exciting one. So let me come out from my slides. And here we have a mobile application that's using Azure Active Directory, but in my slide I said B2C. So let's switch to my B2C solution. The code is technically identical, so not many differences here. So if you've ever built applications or mobile apps with Xamarin or Maui, as it's going to be in a couple of months, I'm using Xamarin Forms here. I'm using Xamarin Forms 5, which is the latest, and I'm using .NET, in fact, to build an Android and an Apple or an iOS application in the same solution. The nice thing here is that the identity component is fairly lightweight. There's only very few lines of code to use to authenticate, and then after that, it's just a case of passing the identity object or the sign-in user into my different pages. So the application starts with the app XAML. So let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see the structure. So there's an app XAML, which is the starting point for our application. And then here I have a login page, which is the first page that you see when you come into the application, and a login result, which in effect takes us to after the authenticated user has come in, we're displaying some data. This is only for demo purposes. The code is available for you on GitHub, so I will provide links for those as well. But the nice thing is that with very few lines of code, I am able to actually go and implement identity. So you can see here we have a public client application builder. This is part of the Microsoft Identity Client library, our MSAL for mobile and desktop. And here we're passing in some information that we acquired from Azure Active Directory. These are the constants here that we need. So here we're saying we're using our Azure Active Directory to sign in. This is my client ID for my app registration. And we need to provide an iOS keychain so I can store the MSAL tokens securely in iOS. But the main juicy bits here is the tenant ID, which tells which Azure Active Directory B2C we're going to be using, my client ID, and my sign-in policy. This is the one that says, how do you want your users to interact with Azure Active Directory? And then some of these are used inside the code to build the client. So if we go into my appsample.cs, you'll see that we have the client ID, my authority, and then what do we want to happen once we sign in? Where are we going to receive the tokens? And once we sign in, then it will take us to the login page, which is nothing really fancy other than as soon as the page loads, it checks to see if we have an account. If we don't have an account, then it will actually ask us to sign in. But we have already done that, so this is more of a secure feature. Then we acquire a token, and if we already signed in, it doesn't do anything on appearing. And then we are actually signing in, we're grabbing the token, and sorry, that's the login page. That's what we've been looking. So this is where we sign in with that client, and then on the login results, that's the one I wanted to say. So here, if we are authenticated, we need to be authenticated, otherwise it will redirect us back. It's going to read the token. It's going to read the ID token. It's going to enumerate through the claims the information inside the token. And if you haven't seen a token before, then let me just bring one up. So at the very top over here, we have an actual B2C token. I was playing around with that yesterday. So you can ignore this. This is the header. So the main juicy bit here, these are the claims that we're actually getting from the application, from the sign-in. So it should be something like this here. And there's no be a dot there. There you go. So here you can see that I got my expiration day. I got my what time it was issued, what time I signed in, my my client ID, and my audience, and my B2C. So this is the information that I showed you in the code. It matches that, but you also see an IDP, says tweets. So my identity provider, the original identity provider, was actually Twitch. So I'll show you how this works. And I get the information I need to display to the user. So let's see the application running. In fact, so let's go here. I'm going to come out. They're both installed and running. So I will sign in with B2C. I might already be signed in, by the way. So let's see what happens. Okay, I'm not signed in. So I'm going to log in. And then here, check this out. So this is the customized page for my application. And I can use my username and password to sign in. So let's do that. So this signs me in, it takes a couple of seconds, and it says the token issuer was B2C. That's my email address, and I logged in at 6:23 a.m. in the morning. So if I log out now and go back to login, now I'm going to sign in with my Twitch account. So here, you'll notice that it actually, it didn't. If that was the case, it would redirect me to, I have already tested that, that's why it didn't do it. It will redirect me on the browser to Twitch to sign in with my Twitch account. And then it will grab that token, come back, and show that information. Let's see what the code looks like for this, right? So you'll notice that the token issuer here is different. It's B2C with Twitch, custom message from me. And then the email address is different. Now you notice previously I signed in with my Outlook, but on my Twitch account, I'm using my Microsoft account. And therefore, the email address that comes back is from Twitch that says this is the claims that you got. And it also says what time I signed in. Right. So let's see how that code looks like. So we said we have the on appearing, so it will go and grab the token, it will grab the claims, and then I'm doing a little bit of a check here to see what it does, right? So I have my, I'm saying, look, if I'm signing in from tweets, then we need to do some manipulation on the token, and we need to grab some extra information. Otherwise, just display the data that we have on the token. So here I'm going to get this tweets data. I'm getting my email from tweets because B2C doesn't know that information. So I'm using the token that came from my sign-in to go back into tweets and say, get me the token. So this is where the magic happens. I'm calling directly into tweets to get that information. So the actual lines of code, because I've been saying too much. So the actual lines of code for the identity component is these 5 lines of code. And then inside my login page where we do the sign in, we have maybe another 6 lines of code, and that's it. The logout is, so this is the on appearing, and then if we need to sign in again, then this is here, and then there's a logout, which is on the login result, which is like 2 lines of code. There you go. So on logout, we're just removing all the tokens from the cache, and we're logging out the user. We're killing them and taking them back to the login page. So easy peasy, like super easy to implement, very few lines of code, and that's super important. Now, as I said, most of the apps may be calling other APIs. We're already doing it here, as you can see, a direct HTTP call to an API. But what if we were building a .NET API? How would that work? Well, in a very similar way, signing into Azure AD or B2C would get us the ID token, and then we will request an access token with a specific scope and say, go and get me an access token so I can call into an API. And you can secure your APIs super easily. If you are using .NET, then I can spin up the terminal. I don't know why I closed my terminal down. But here, let's make it big. So we can say cd projects, and then here we'll do a .NET new. Let's say web API, and we'll call it Xamarin backend, and then we'll say -auth single org, and this will go and create a new web API for us with all the code wired up. So cd Xamarin backend, and then here we can open it in code and see what's inside. What is inside there? How hard is it to secure an API? So we saw the front end, which is the mobile app. Now let's see the back end. If you are using .NET, or if you are using .NET Core, then since 3.1 we added a new library called the Microsoft Identity.web, which makes things super easy. And in here, well, let's go to the app settings. It has already wired up the settings for us. So we have to go into Azure AD and configure this. And then inside startup, we have the code. I don't want you now. We have the necessary code to wire up the authentication. So let me hide this. So as you can see, lines 32 and 33 are doing the authentication wiring in the middleware, but they say you have to use Azure AD to do that. There's an easier way to do all this and be more concise. You can say services.add Microsoft Web App Authentication and pass the configuration there. Extra line. And that's it. And then in here, we have the user authentication. And now if I go to my API controllers, you'll notice that at the very top it has authorize, which means that any access to this API controller needs to be authenticated. And in here, we also have scopes. So not only do we check for a valid token, but we also request that the token has the right scope, and then we can use that information for authorizing users. So we're not actually using the scopes anywhere, but if we were to use them, I think here, you'll see that it has verified user has any accepted scope, or you can use an attribute, authorize for scopes, and scope required by API. Look at that. This is how clever the new GitHub pilot is. It already did it for me. And yes, I want to use that. There you go. So the API now is secure and it expects scopes. And then the front end, this is authorized for scope. What is not like here? It needs to be an array. Okay. API secure, front end secure. If we were to use the Azure AD component, I know we're running out of time, but for Azure Active Directory, very similar experience. So here we have a colleague app. So I'm calling into Graph to get some information. If you haven't used Microsoft Graph, then this is super fun. Again, all the code is taking place inside our shared library. So there's nothing specific to Azure, to iOS or Android, except for a couple small settings. But here you can see, again, we're creating a public client application. It means that I'm going to use a public client that anybody can crack into the code and look at that information. So nothing sensitive, or we don't have any keys or secrets, right? So here with the public client, we say, go into my my standard Azure Active Directory, go into my tenant, because I want you to sign in with my Azure Active Directory, not all the Azure Active Directories. So it's a single tenant app. And with that, once it gets there, we have a main page where this is for the sign in. Let me see. We have an auth service. This is where all the magic happens, where we sign in the users. So we try to sign them in and we try to get a token silently. If we can't get a token silently from the cache because they haven't signed in before, it will try to interactively sign in the user. We will get the appropriate information. Also uses the system web view options, which is cool. That means that we can actually force single sign-on and ensure that a single sign-on works, especially for mobile apps that have been onboarded to your enterprise. And the sign out, again, is a couple of lines of code, literally just one line of code. So it's very easy to implement all that. And then in the main page, we sign in the users, and then we have a people page where we display everything. And then I have a colleague view model where it goes and looks into all my colleagues and gets that information using Graph. So here I'm having a method called load graph data, and you'll notice I'm passing from my authentication object that we instantiated on the app XAML. So not over here, but in the app here we have the auth result, which gets populated once we sign in. We can pass it around, and then with that information, I can actually go and call Graph. So I have my access token here. I can call my Graph and get the information. So let's see this in action, because I know that time is valuable. So back to our emulator. I'm going to close this. I'm going to open my Azure Active Directory app. Slightly different UI. Do not judge me on the design skills. I'm not a designer. So I'm only working on the practical things. So let's see. Okay, so it doesn't remember my app. So Christos at I'm using my own tenant, and I'm a cheapskate, so I don't have a custom domain. Now I need to get my password. I don't remember it, so I need to copy paste it because it's a super long one. See, it's a security in the works. And then we can paste that and sign in. At this point, it could also ask me for multi-factor authentication because it is configured, but I have already gone through that process, so it trusts my device, so it doesn't need two-factor authentication here, but it definitely prompts you if you have that configured. And the nice thing is that because I have already done it, it remembers me. In fact, if I close the app, no, I want to do this. If I close the app and come back, it will remember that I'm signed in. Will it? Will it? Will I remember? It will remember that I'm signed in because here, he already had my token in the cache. So these are all my colleagues, supposedly. This is my test tenant. If you haven't seen this before, or if you don't know how to get one, then we have the Microsoft Developer 365 program that gives you a full Azure Active Directory for free to play and do whatever you want. So this is a P2, like a full-blown Azure Active Directory with test data that allows you to do things like this, because in many cases I want to test stuff and the Microsoft tenant is super locked down. We're not allowed to do super advanced permissions or elevated permissions to our tenant, obviously for good reasons. 250,000 employees there. We can't go poking around. So the test tenant is a fantastic way for us to do what we want to do and test things. And there you have it. I'm going to leave a few minutes for any questions if there are any. And all this code is available on GitHub on our 45 show. And we have blog posts that explain how to wire it up yourselves. So if you want, and I hope that I convinced you to start implementing identity through the Microsoft Identity platform and secure your apps like that end to end. So all that is available to you. And if you want to learn more, you can always join us on the 45 show to see us doing it live, Tuesdays and Fridays. In fact, I have my slide there. Hey.
Yeah, hi again. Christos, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. It was useful. So we have a couple of questions. The first one is, you mentioned an Azure Active Directory B2C. What's the main difference between Azure AD B2C and normal Azure A2C Active Directory tenant?
Well, the Azure Active Directory tenant technically allows you to build line of business apps. So if you have a Microsoft.com address and I have a Microsoft.com address, when I build my app, everybody can sign in to that application. So it's for internal data, and also it gives you access to things like Azure and SharePoint. So that account, when it signs in, you can request permissions to access other resources. So it's mainly for building line of business apps, whereas the B2C one is for building customer-facing apps. So if you go to Safeway, if you go to Subway, if you go to Walmart, if you go to Nike to buy shoes, and you need to sign in, you need to have an identity system. But you're not a Nike employee, right? So if you were using Azure AD, you had to be a Nike employee to sign in. With B2C, you can be anyone, an external customer coming in, creating an account, and then buying stuff. So that's the main difference there.
Okay, thank you. And we have one more question left. If we are using on-prem Active Directory and would like to move to the Azure Active Directory, so what will be your recommendations? Maybe some pain points and tips and tricks.
There are definitely pain points when it comes to that, absolutely. But it's not as hard. There's Azure AD Connect that allows you to, in fact, sync an on-prem Active Directory to an Azure Active Directory, and therefore move most of the heavy lifting to Azure Active Directory and make it available to everyone from everywhere. If you don't want to fully migrate, that's one of the solutions and the topologies that we can support. There are more complex topologies as well. Obviously, if you're using ADFS, we want you to move away from that and move into Azure AD. But right now, if you're looking to move and you don't want to fully migrate upfront, then Azure AD Connect allows you to sync between on-prem and the cloud and use both at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. So that's it. Thank you again for your great presentation. Have a nice day, and good luck.
Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely day. Good luck with the rest of the conference, and hopefully I'll see you in person next year. Thank you.